posting things so you know where you are. Design and setup is where you figure out what it is you're going to do, define your topology. Execute is always the meat of the experiment where something interesting happens. And then finish is where you archive your data and you clean up your resources so they go back into the pool so other people can have access to them. All right, so what's the Genie portal? The Genie portal is this web-based tool to manage users, getting an account, projects, and slices. We're going to talk about all those in a minute. And also has some simple tools to reserve resources, and we're integrating new things all the time, and so that's sort of constantly changing and improving. The second tool we're using is FLAC, and it's a graphical user interface for designing topologies and reserving resources. This morning we're going to use it for both, and this afternoon we're going to just use it for the first, and we're going to use a different tool for the second piece of that, and that'll sort of become clear as we go. All right, so just sort of jumping in to a couple of terms. An experimenter is just what you think it would be. It's a researcher who uses Genie resources. And the important thing is that different types of experimenters have different roles and therefore different permissions in Genie. So an advisor and their grad student has different roles and responsibilities. And a teacher, their TA, and a student in a class would also all have different responsibilities. Great. The second Genie term that we're going to use today is projects. And projects are how we organize research in Genie. And basically, projects contain both people, that's the experimenters, and their experiments, where here in the picture, those experiments are represented by slices. So, a project has a single person who's a project lead who is responsible for what happens in his project, and that's a very important responsibility. That means if something goes wrong at 3 a.m., they're willing to get email or be contacted to help make things right. And then he's responsible for the things that the people in him do in the slices in his project, right? So projects sort of bound responsibility. And so today, we have a project actually for not just for this tutorial, but for all of GEC. And so we're using that project for today. But when you go home, you would have your own project that you would use. All right, so jumping into the first little bit of the hands-on piece, we're going to talk about some of the setup. And first, we're going to do some of the sort of one-time setup that you don't have to do for every experiment. We've already designed the experiment for you. It's a very simple two-node topology. Everybody has already created a Genie account. And then somebody, usually the professor in a class or the head of a research lab, would add you to a project. We added a lot of people yesterday, and a couple of people didn't get caught up in that, and so we're going to add those people here in a minute. And then we're going to do this one-time thing where we generate an SSH key pair for logging into resources. All right, real quick, you've already done this, but the portal is at portal.genie.net. There's a wiki page with instructions for how to get an account, which you've already done, but that page is helpful if maybe you need to give it to an advisor or a student or a colleague to get an account. And I want to highlight a few sort of tidbits here. So when you log in, you logged in one of two ways. You either used InCommon, or you got an account through the GPO IDP, identity provider. The InCommon piece is actually pretty handy, and if your school has it, it's really, really helpful. Basically, InCommon is a federation of educational institutions, somewhere north of 300 of them, and basically it enables single sign-on. So it allows you to do the way you would use a Google account to log into a third-party website. This allows you to use an account issued by your university to log in to Genie resources. And so if you have a classroom full of students, a lot of times they can just go and log in and they have an account and they just need to join your project. If you're a research project, it's sort of the same. And this means that if you're a member of InCommon and the right attributes are shared, that's fantastic. That means there's no new password, there's no new login screens, it's not another thing to forget. And so that's really handy. But if you don't have that, we have this other way of getting you an account. All right. And then before we really get into things, there's a couple of little things that sometimes trip people up, which I wanted to talk about a little bit. So in Genie, we use SSH with a key pair, so a public-private key pair. So we do SSH with a private key. Many people have done SSH with a password, but Genie will, no node in Genie, no compute node in Genie will ever ask you for your password, and that's really, really important. So what we do is usual public-private key cryptography. You generate a key pair, the public key gets loaded onto your node, your private key is kept locally, and you tell your tool how to, your SSH, local SSH about the private key, and it uses that, it offers that up to the SSH connection, and so you can log in. And you don't have to use a password. There is a passphrase that's associated with the key, but you should not have to enter that all the time. And today we're going to use, for people who are Unix or Linux users, we're going to use something called SSH add, or SSH agent, and we're going to use a command called SSH add, which is how you tell SSH about your private key. So this is really important. If you're ever prompted for a password to log into a Genie compute node, something has always gone wrong. Either you haven't offered the private key, or for some reason there was a problem with the system and your public key wasn't loaded. All right. The second concept that sometimes trips new users up is the concept of expiration and renewal. And we're going to, we have a project, we're going to create this slice, and we're going to create resources, reserve resources in that slice. And each of these things has an expiration time, and they all bound each other. So the project has an expiration time, or has an optional expiration time to bound. The project leads responsibility for what happens in the project. The slice always has an expiration time, but that slice won't be any later than the project's expiration time. And if you reserve resources in that slice, it also has an expiration time, and that's bounded by the slice's expiration time. And moreover, the reservations for each of the resources might be different. So when you go to renew, you have to renew not just the slice, but you also have to renew your individual reservations. And so that can kind of trip some people up. Sometimes they'll renew the slice but forget to renew the slivers, or the resources that they have reserved. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, and we're going to talk about, this afternoon we're going to talk about how to sort of debug this and how to make sure this doesn't happen to you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. There are instructions. This is the green instructions. And we're going to start with the top of page 3. And I'm going to, this first part, let's do together. So anybody who hasn't joined a project, we'll do that together. We'll generate SSH keys together, and we'll sort of get that all set up. And some of the later portions I might, do by myself. But okay, so let's just start by logging into the portal. Hopefully, good. Real quick, before we get started, the instruction, there's a wiki page for this project. You can Google for GEC19 agenda and find the agenda for the conference, and then you can find the page for this class. And at the bottom, there's the tutorial materials, so you can find the instructions here. And so you can just pop open the instructions. Excellent. Fantastic. You know what I'm supposed to do here? I'm not. But I'm not on the Wi-Fi. I don't think. Sorry, folks. Oh, sorry. I plugged the wrong thing. So sorry. No, I am on the Wi-Fi, sorry. I forgot to turn it off. That was smart of me. What? I think I'm good. Let me give it a second. Sorry about that. Oh, that'll help us. Hold it just a second. You could remember these things. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Okay, so there are instructions. Let's see if I can actually open the instructions. No, I can't. All right. Actually, can you come fix this? But I'm not on the Wi-Fi. This works too? Okay. I have. Okay. Here. Let's do it, or do I need to put an email address? I have one of these. Do I just press the password?
Oh yeah, just use the same one you did.
I never had to fill in my username before. Can you make this right? Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through walking through the portal. So go to portal.genie.net. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. If you have a temp account, if you have a Genie temp account, when it asks for your institution, say Genie Project Office, and you can find it by starting to type the words Genie in the window, and it'll fill it in. Okay, so go to portal.genie.net, and you're going to type in your username and password. Whatever you used before, the institution you used before. If you have a Genie identity provider account, you can type in Genie and type in your username and password. I'm going to wait a second while people do it. Also possibly. Should we use the Wi-Fi instead? Whatever works. All right. Is people logged in? Okay, good. So if you're looking at the browser, you sort of start at the top. You'll notice there's a toolbar across the top. On the upper right-hand corner is your name, and parentheses is your username, which is really occasionally you'll need to know that information. And there's a toolbar across the top. The main page is the home page, and that's for most of your day-to-day sort of things. And there's also a profile page, which is for sort of one-time setup, which is really handy. Then going sort of down from the top of the page, there's a map. Then there's a list of the projects that you're a member of, and then your slices. And then below that, there's some log messages. And so this is the part of the program where if you don't see a project listed, in particular if you don't see the GEC19 project, you should go click Join Project. Thank you so much. And I will now show this to you. Thank you so much. No, I should have triple checked. Okay, so we're at portal.genie.net. I'm going to log in real quick. And I'm using a temporary account so that things won't be cluttered up with what I do at home. Okay. Good. Real quick, I forgot to mention the account activation page. There's some Genie policies. Basically, be reasonable. If you're coming in through InCommon, some information like your email address may be shared with other people who use Genie. And finally, if you use Genie and you write a paper and it gets published, please cite us. That's sort of how you pay it back to us, right? And so if you agree, you click agree and you activate. Good. And here is the home page we already talked about. Here's my username and my name. We're on the home page. And you can see here that I don't have any projects because I just signed into this account. So I'm going to click Join a Project if you haven't done this already. And then I'm going to look for the GEC19 project. And I'm going to click Join. And then I'm not even going to bother changing the message. I'm just going to send a join request, and this sends somebody an email, and they're going to approve this account. And that'll take a minute. And so while that happens, switch back. Good. So we've logged in, we've joined a project, and the third thing we're going to do is we're going to generate an SSH key. Okay. So while I'm waiting to join the project, you go to Profile. And there's this SSH tab. And because this is a tutorial and it's easier, I'm going to have the portal generate an SSH key pair for me, and I'm going to download the private key. So I'm going to click Generate and download an SSH key pair. And this is asking me for a passphrase to protect that key. So the passphrase is something that's private to me, that's associated with the key, and never leaves my machine. But you're going to need it again later. And in particular, you're going to need it after lunch. So if you're worried about forgetting it, you maybe write it down somewhere, stick it in your wallet, something like that. Okay, so you're going to enter the same passphrase twice. And it's generated an SSH key pair. Unfortunately, the tab doesn't stay in the right place, so you have to click on SSH again. But now you can download your private key. Okay, so I'm going to click download private key, and I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to let it go in the default location. All right, and here's a spot. Oh, yeah, we have a question? Yes. Okay, just do the SSH key part. Somebody's should be adding you to the project, and you can do the SSH key part in parallel while that's happening. Oh, you can go to home. You can go to home, or you can go to the profile. Go to the profile tab to find the SSH. Who's using a Windows machine? Okay, so we're about to do something that's slightly different than what you do on your machine. Did anybody with Windows not do the pre-work? Okay. Is there a Windows user next to you? All right. We'll help you out if you have any issues. Basically, if you're a Unix user or Linux user, we're going to do that bit with the SSH key agent, and we're going to add that private key. We're going to put the key in a standard place, and we're going to add the key to our agent so that it gets offered up for us. If you're Windows, the process is a little different, and depending on the SSH tool you're using, it's probably better to sort of just hang out for a second while we do this. What clients are people using? Are people using Bitvice? Yeah. Who's using Bitvice? 3? Okay. Is anybody using FireSSH? No. What other Windows people? What SSH clients are you using? What? Putty? Okay. Had you figured out how to work that before you came? Okay. Good. Anybody else? Got Putty also? All right. Actually, would you two mind sitting next to each other? Could you help him out if he has trouble with Putty? Is that okay? Or is that totally improbable? Move. Okay. Is that okay? All right. Thanks. Is that okay? Just raise your hand so he knows who you are. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Good. All right. So for Unix users, oh wait, hold on, let me. So good. So just to talk through these commands, looks complicated and it's really simple. We're going to move the private key from the default from the downloads folder. We're going to put it in the .sh directory because that's the standard place for it. We're going to change the permissions so that they're tighter. The permissions are tighter. Because SSH doesn't like you to have just some freely available, anybody can read this private key, which makes sense because it's your private key. And then we're going to run this SSH add command, which tells SSH, which is how you tell SSH about your private key. And these instructions are on the bottom of page 4, and obviously in the online version of the instructions. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to do these steps. And in particular, so I'm going to fail because this is a clean account and I blew away my stuff. So I'm going to make my .ssh directory. If you don't have a .ssh directory, you might need to do the same. So I'm moving the file into place. I'm changing the permissions. And then I'm going to run ssh add. And then this is just getting ready. And then this is where I have to enter that passphrase again. All right, so now I've told my SSH client about my private key, and so I don't have to mess with this ever. I don't have to mess with this again for the rest of the tutorial, which is really nice. Okay, so I'll never have to enter another passphrase or password. Okay. Good. All right. So, anybody have any questions? That sort of makes sense? Everybody able to download their key? All right. Okay. So while we're getting added to the project, we're going to talk about a couple more Genie terms. A resource is a piece of Genie infrastructure, and that can be real or virtual. And I mean, when I say real, I mean the sense of bare metal, right? Like an actual, whole compute node, for example. Or it can be a virtual resource. And by virtual, I mean virtual in the sense of a virtual machine, or a VLAN, or OpenFlow flow space. I don't mean virtual in the sense of an emulation, right? They're sort of both real, but some of them are bare metal and some of them are virtual machines. And so there's, compute versions of these. There's wireline resources and wireless resources. And we describe our resources with something called resource specifications, which are basically always abbreviated as RSpecs. And they're just an XML file. It describes the resources that you want, the resources that are available, the resources that you have, things like that. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in the second half of this tutorial. But people are going to talk about that. You're going to hear that term a lot. Then an aggregate is the sort of people and software who manage a set of reservable resources. So the most common aggregates that you'll hear about are Genie racks. And they're, in fact, actual racks of equipment. And there's two flavors. InstaGenie flavor is built by the folks at the University of Utah and HP. And the ExoGenie flavor is built by the folks at Vinci and IBM. And so in addition to the Genie racks, each of the racks has an OpenFlow switch, and there's OpenFlow in other parts of sort of our nationwide network. And so each is an aggregate, and then there's WiMAX resources, which are also an aggregate. And then finally, our third term is a slice, and this is sort of the canonical sort of Genie concept, right? So, but a slice is just a container of resources that you use in your experiment. And so, in the picture over here, right, it's just a label. It's just a bag of stuff, and they're cheap and they're inexpensive, right? And I get my slice, and then I reserve some resources to go in that slice, right? And so a slice can contain resources from many different aggregates. So it can get resources that are in many different places that that have been asked for from different people. A slice always belongs in a single project. A slice always has an expiration. So if you forget about it, the resources will eventually expire and be released back into the pool of available resources. And then you should think about public slice names as being public, meaning anyone can see it. They're reusable and they're unique, at least within the context of a project. So the reusable and unique piece means that I can have a sliced foo now, and that slice, there can only be one slice in my project called slice foo, and at this point in time, but that slice foo may expire, and I can make a new slice foo. And while they have the same name, they're actually different slices, right? They wouldn't, you know, there's properties associated with the slice that would, you know, sort of not continue. It would be different. Okay, so that's a slice. It's a container for your resources. Okay, so sort of tying this all together a little bit, we have a project, and it has a lead. The leads are always, almost always, say, a professor at a school or a senior technical person at a company. Then there's, you know, there can be other members of the project. There's slices that belong to that project, and then I have resources reserved within an aggregate. All right, so a little bit more hands-on. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in and create that slice. This is a very quick and easy operation. Right now, we're going to skip the renewal piece, because we're going to come back to that this afternoon, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit more depth than we sometimes do. And then we're going to reserve 2 VMs connected by a link, and we're going to wait for them to come up. Okay? So I think this is something that you can sort of watch me do, but sort of be. We'll sort of do it together a little bit, but I'll tell you when to stop and we can watch stuff. Okay, so we don't need the slides for this. Okay, so back at the portal, come back to the home page, and hopefully I've been added to my project, and indeed I have. Thank you, whoever did that. Okay, so I have a project, and I'm going to click on the project just for a second so you can see it. So I have one action I can do in a project, which is to create a slice. There's some properties of this project, including the expiration. It expires at the end, sometime next week. Nikki, who's been floating in and out of the room, is the project lead, and so she's taking responsibility for what happens. I don't have any slices, and then you can see that there are 200 members of the project, because basically almost everybody at GEC is a member. And then at the bottom, there's a log of recent project actions. Right, so I'm going to create a slice. Oh, we are on, by the way, we're on the top of page 5 in the green handout, if you're following along. So creating a slice is really easy. And I'd like, so there's a worksheet for this handout. It should have been right behind the green thing, and it says worksheet for lab 0 getting started with Genie. And it lists your project as GEC19, and it suggests a slice name. And it suggests that you use lab 0 and then your initials. And the initials is to keep it unique. I said before that your slice name has to be unique within your project. And since we're all running the same exercise, it'd be tempting for us all to use the same slice name, which would be okay. And then in a minute, we're gonna use the rest of the page. Okay, so I'm gonna call my slice lab 0. Apparently, I have called a slice that in the past, unsurprisingly. Yes. Does somebody have a question? Great. So I'm just going to create a slice, and that's it. Very slowly, it's going to come up. So, you know, that's it. So I have a slice, and it's just a container, so it's quick and easy to come up. And so you can see here that I have some actions I can take on my slice. I have, I can renew my slice, and there's some tools. And then I can see who's a member of my slice. I'll talk about why there's already so many people. And then there's a long list of aggregates below that. But for now, we're going to go, we're skipping step 3.2 on renewal because we're going to come back to that in a minute. And so we're on step 3.3, which really gets going on the top of page 6. And so what we're going to do is we're going to launch FLAC. And FLAC is this tool I was telling you about that allows us to draw and reserve topologies. And so this is going to go talk to all our aggregates, and so this is going to take a minute. Okay. So okay, so second, so I'm gonna talk for a second while it comes up. When it comes up, you can tell that it's ready because there's this green box in the upper left which has your username. It'll also show your slice name. Here it was just portal 1 in the picture. And then there's 2 columns of these colored boxes, and each box represents an aggregate. And initially when it comes up, there's a list on the left. And what's happening is those are all the aggregates, and it's going to go query and find out what resources it has. And when it finds out if there's resources, it populates this second list on the right. So what we're doing is we're waiting for that username to come in, the slice to come in, the list of aggregates to happen, and there's a little spinning icon at the top. And when things are ready, it'll stop spinning. So you can see the little spinning thing, and you can see my aggregates are getting filled in. And so we're waiting for this to come up. All right, in a second here, we're all going to use a different aggregate, or rather there's like 3 or 4 in the room. And the aggregate you should use is specified on your worksheet in sort of the third item. It says aggregate. Mine says NiserNet InstaGenie. And then, so that means that I have the InstaGenie rack that's at NiserNet, which is a regional. And then it tells me this string that looks like a domain name. That's the name that FLAC knows it by. Unfortunately, they're the same. So the one's the human readable name, the other one is sort of what FLAC knows. So my FLAC is still loading next week time. And so mine is known as instagenie.nisernet.org. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about this being nice and stuff? Are people able to find the FLAC button to create their slides and use FLAC? Anybody have a problem with that? We'll wait for a second while this comes up. There's one aggregate that's being slow, and I'm just going to kill it so that we can continue. You can just sort of let yours run. Okay, so I have these aggregates, and basically each of these rows represents a different aggregate. If there's resources at an aggregate, you get these buttons on the right, and they tend to come in 2 flavors. If you're PC means there's a raw node, a bare metal node, like the whole machine that's available. And VM means that you can get either a true VM or a container. Today we're going to use OpenVZ containers because they're quick and easy to come up, and that's great for what we're doing. And I'm going to go find my aggregate. Unfortunately, the list is getting long. So mine's instagenie.nisernet, and it's this sort of pink color. And so I'm going to click on the VM button, and I get a VM, and then I'm going to click on it a second time, and I get a second VM, okay? So I have my 2 VMs, and I want to connect them via link. And so if I sort of mouse near the node, I get this line that shows up. If I go far away, it disappears. If I go near it, and then I click and hold, and then I drag, and I wait for it to turn green and release, I get a link, and the link has this little label. And I'm going to do that again real quick. I'm nearby, I click, I hold, I drag, I release, and I get a link up, okay? That's actually possibly the hardest thing we're going to do. If you, I'm going to show you how to do the rest of this little bit, and then you can, we'll take a moment and everybody can do it on their own, okay? So I'm just going to sort of run through this part of the exercise real quick. Okay, so good. So to edit your resources, you click on the eye icon. And so I'm going to click on one of those. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the name. So I can set it to be client, which is nice. And I'm going to set the IP address for my interface. So I'm going to click on this Interfaces and Links tab. And there's a space for the IP address. And the IP address is in your instructions. It's on page 7 in step K. And so it's 10.1.1.1. We have a /24, which is just 255.255.255.0. And I'm going to hit apply. If you didn't catch that, you can watch it again because I'm going to do a very similar thing on the other node. So I click on I to edit, and I'm going to click type in server. And then I'm going to go to the link. I'm going to set the IP. This time I'm using the information in step N on page 7. And so this is 10.1.1.2, and the mask is 255.255.255.0. And I'm going to hit apply. And so this is starting to look pretty good. I'm personally going to go double check my link. I'm going to click on the link, and I can see, look, this looks right. I have 2 IP addresses on the same subnet. And if this was further away, you could see that they're both on the same, they have the same mask, which sounds great. So I have everything, and so I'm going to go ahead and hit submit, so this can be coming up. And then it's going to ask me to confirm that I really want these resources. Great. All right, so that's going to go, and it's going to try to reserve my resources. And that's fantastic. This is going to take a little while because real work is happening, right? I'm getting these 2 containers, and it's going out and it's asking for them. So this would be a good time for you to sit down and go through and reserve your topologies, and Chaos and I will walk through and we'll help out folks who need help. And if you think you're ready, you can go ahead and hit submit. Yeah. Okay. Do you want just hit submit? Let's double check. Yeah, you just hit submit. Yeah, I'll let you click it. Yeah, it's going to ask to confirm before it actually does something fun. Great. Still in? So you'll notice, looks like folks are doing pretty good. So what's happening is it's going and it's reserving the resources, and it's going and it's pulling periodically. Are things ready? Is everything up? Is it up? And so it's turned to yellow because some progress has been made, but things aren't ready. And what you're waiting for is you're waiting for it to turn green. Green is good, right? Green means go. And so when this is ready, it'll turn green. And I'm going to... So we do this, change the names, we set the IP and mask, we reserve resources. Okay, so we're waiting for our resources to turn green. While we're waiting for them to turn green, I'm going to pull up the next slide. Actually, I'm going to wait a second first. How are folks doing? Who's hit submit? Who has not hit submit?
So he's hitting a screen in FLAC that I'm not familiar with. Oh, that's
Oh yeah, that's like an edit, I think. Can you hit the red X in the upper right hand corner? Okay, and then click on your do you have your slicer? Where's your slicer? Can you do me a favor? it's just, Alright, can you do me a favor, close the tab and start again? You'll still remember your resources. Try launching FLAC again, and if it doesn't fix itself, let me know, and we'll work on it. Okay? Ah, that's good. It'll remember any work you've done. Okay. Oh, don't click that. Yeah. Hit X. You should click your name. Cancel. Show. Why you don't have hit your name. Hit this. I'm actually not sure why. Your slice usually should show up and you should be able to click over and see. Maybe somebody changed something. There's a way to get back, and I don't. I feel like the place I usually click onto is not there. Just chaos. It keeps clicking on the thing and losing the slice context. And I thought there was a place to click on your slice on the left. I thought it back. Let's see that. Can you go? You might need to go find somebody. These two, they're both having trouble. Somebody who's not seeing. Okay, I'm going to continue talking, and we're going to get somebody to help these guys. Okay, so we're ready for the execute part of our experiment, and this is the sort of the meat of things. And so we have our two-node topology, and what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to log into each node, and then we're going to run a simple experiment. We're going to send some IP traffic, aka we're going to hit ping. Then we're going to install a piece of software called iPerf, and we're going to use that to measure the bandwidth of a couple of our interfaces. And then we're going to play with our data plane and control plane interfaces, and we're going to break things a little bit, and that's it. So the way this works, the important thing to understand here is we have these two nodes, and each node has two interfaces. This is very, very important, okay? So each node has a data plane interface and a control plane interface. And the data plane interface is where you run your experiments, right? That's where all the important traffic that you're sending goes, your sort of experiment traffic. And then in addition, there's a control plane interface. And this control interface is how you access your node. That's how you log into your node to change things. It's how you get data off your node. And so the control interface is connected to the wider internet. And then your data plane interface is sort of connected, is plumbed between the Genie racks. And there's, or in this case, we're all within one rack, and so we've got one there. Okay? So that's really important. We have two interfaces, data plane, control plane. We're going to play with that a whole bunch here in a second. Okay, so so we're on, by the way, page 9. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go log in to each of our nodes. And you can find your login information by clicking on the I. So you'll see your login information up here. If you are on, say, a Mac, there's this SSH button. And that, depending on, you know, the OS you're running and the tool, you might be able to click on that and it might just do the right thing. But I'm not going to assume that. So there's a spot on the worksheet where you can list your login information. And I might have even, yep, brought a pen. Good. So there should be pins on the table if you need a pin. So I'm going to fill in my login information. So my username is here. My username is a little funky because I'm using a temp account. So it says GEC19 user21. Then I have my host name. And then there's a colon and followed by by the port that I'm going to SSH into, right? So the control plane is sort of natted, and so everybody can't SSH on port 22, so we're going to do that. So let me write this down so I can do this in a second. and then I'm going to look up the equivalent information on my server, which is pretty similar, except the port number is different. Okay, all right, so Unix users, we're going to go and we're going to log in. Windows users should use whatever technique is appropriate for your client. So if you're using PuTTY, you have to do the PuTTY thing. And if you're using Bitvice, you should do the same process that you did for the pre-work, where you uploaded the private key for the host, and you can trouble getting 2 logins going with Bitvice. The thing there is, I think you have to run the client twice. It's not like a tab within Bitvice. You have to have 2 instances of it. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to SSH into my nodes. Okay, and it's going to, here, let me make this bigger. It's going to ask me if I want to continue. So I say yes, and then I'm logged in. And then I'm going to log into the server node. Yeah, sorry, Don. I knew it was simple, and I just couldn't find it. Okay. Right. So, actually, you know what? This font is this font too big? Can I make it smaller? Will people in the back be able to see? If I make this smaller, no. Can you see if I make it smaller? Is that too far? Sorry? Keep going? Oh, I'll stop. Let's make this. Okay, so I usually put my client on my left and my server on the right, but I just like to have a little more screen real estate width-wise here. So, okay. All right, so I'm logged into my client and my server. You can do, host name. You can see that the first part of my name is client. On the other one, it's server. It's fantastic, so I'm logged in. Okay, and so now we're going to, actually, let's take a moment. Who is not logged into their, who doesn't know how to log into it? Okay. Is anybody having trouble logging in? I know the 2 folks over here are doing the other thing. Okay. Using Bitvice? Okay. Generated. Oh, okay. Key slot 1, that looks promising. And then you have to enter your passphrase for your key. And you've already hit this button, right? Oh, it has 2. Okay. Do you have the key somewhere? Okay, that's fine. And you've uploaded the public key before we start. So you tried and failed to log in. Okay. Can you go to the portal? Can you go to the top and find the profile tab? Good. So this is your private key you want to be using? So download that. You might try pulling away. You have multiple keys in there. Would you mind blowing them away and adding them in? Okay. Because I've seen people have trouble with 2 before. Hi.
Client and so at the same time?
Yeah, 1 on each. Is that okay? This is Bitvice. Yeah, launch Bitvice a second time.
Okay.
Is that the same one? I think you have to have 2 of these windows open. one for each. Does that make sense? Okay, okay, alrighty. Cool, okay, so we're logged into these two nodes, and they're, these OpenVZ containers. And so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna run ifconfig. And so if you look at the ifconfig, there's three interfaces. There's your usual local loopback interface at the bottom. That's fine. And then there's this interface that has your the data plane IP address that you set. And so you know that that one's your data plane IP address. And then there's this other interface, and that interface is the control interface, okay? And so what we should do, this picture on the bottom is actually a worksheet. And so what you want to do is you want to go and run sudo ifconfig, or sbin ifconfig, either way, and fill in the names and IP addresses of the data plane and control plane interfaces on each of your nodes, right? So we're going to use that in a second. All right? So for mine, I know that the control plane, the one I have highlighted is my control plane interface. So I'll write that down. And then I know that the other one is my data plane interface because it has the IP address that I set. And so here I'm going to do the same thing. So here it's exactly the same, or almost exactly the same. There's the same loopback. I know my data plane interface is the one I set, and it's listed on the worksheet. And then the control plane interface is the one above it. Okay. Great. So that's great. So how are folks doing on filling out their worksheet? Anybody have any questions about their worksheet? Does it sort of make sense? Right, so this is sort of what I said before about there's always a data plane interface and a control plane interface on each node. We're just identifying which one's which. If you're having trouble finding the right one, just let us know. Okay, good. So now we're on the top of page 10. As things start to get a little bit more interesting. So we're gonna ping our data interface and then our control interface. Actually, let me. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna start on my client node, and I'm gonna ping the data plane interface of my server node, right? And so that works. That's not particularly surprising, but it means we have connectivity and everything's working as it should. And now I'm going to ping the control plane interface on my server node, which also works. And this is actually an important point. I have my client, and I can ping my server via either the data plane or the control plane. So it's important when you're configuring your experiments to be aware that there can be two paths here. And so you need to make sure that you're actually sending data along with the interface that you think that you are. Okay. Okay, good. And so the next thing we want to do is we want to install some software. And how do I install software on my nodes? You use the exact same tools that you would use on any other node. You use a package manager, and the package manager depends on the OS. And so we've used the default image, for
Genie, and that uses Yum. If we had done this exact same exercise on Genie, we would have, and we didn't specify the image, which we didn't, we would have gotten a different OS, and we would have had to use apt-get. Okay? So the instructions sort of walk you through both, but we're going to do Yum here for a second. And actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run through this part of the exercise really fast so people can see it, and then you can do it yourself, okay? And hopefully this will be really quick, okay? So I'm going to do sudo yum install iperf.
And I'm going to do that in on each of my nodes. And so it's sitting there and it's doing the install. It's going to ask me if I really want to install, and I say yes. Good. Does it really want to install? Okay, good. So I've installed my software, except when I go and type iperf, it doesn't know about it, so I'm going to type rehash so that it'll update its list. So I say iperf, and now it knows about iperf, right? So that's all the rehash. So we'll just type rehash so that it knows. And then on the server side, I'm going to start an iperf server, and that's really simple. That's just iperf-s. I'm on step 5.2 on the instructions, by the way, on page 10. And then I'm going to start a iperf client on my client side. And then I'm going to give it the data plane interface, because I want to run iperf along the data plane. So that's just 10.1.1.2. And this is just going to send as much TCP traffic as it can for 10 seconds, right? So it's sitting there. You can see that it's connected on both sides. It's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking. And it finished, and it sent 97.2 megabits per second, okay? So that's cool. So that seems pretty reasonable. That sounds like maybe that's really a 100 meg link. TCP has a little bit of overhead and some inefficiencies, so I only got 97. That's great. So now I'm going to run iperf client again, but this time I'm going to run it across the control interface. And so, so there I'm going to use my IP address, the control IP address on my server node. So I'm doing the same thing. Good. And so, sort of counterintuitively, I then get 1.35 gigabits on my control interface. So I'm going to write down. Okay. So real quick, I want to go talk about what just happened here. Okay, so we've pinged, we filled out the worksheet, we sent some traffic. Okay, so real quick, so we have, this is our sort of our topology, right? And we sent some bandwidth, some traffic along the data plane interface through the data plane switch, and we got just under 100 megabits per second. And the question is why? And this is a bit of a trick question because, excuse me, sorry. It's a bit of a trick question because the FLAC secretly went in and set the rate of that link for you. It had a default of 100 megabits per second. And
so while we could have gotten more, the tool said, like, if you don't tell me otherwise, I'm going to get 100 megabits per second. And that's something that's configurable in FLAC. But we got 100 megabits per second because it turns out that we told it to. Okay? And that's why.
When we send traffic along the control interface, right, we got actually much more, right? We got a gigabit. But that's because that link wasn't set, and we got sort of whatever was available. And there's not a lot of traffic at the moment, and so, you know, we got a whole bunch. So that's sort of what's going on there. Okay. All right, great. So now what we're going to do is what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to start bringing down some interfaces and see what happens. Okay, so I'm on the top of page 11. There's a note here in the instructions. If you ran the same exercise on an Genie node, which is just another flavor of Genie rec, it actually has this service called Nuka, whose job in life is to sit there and make sure the IP addresses
and forwarding, IP forwarding, and everything is configured exactly as you wanted it to. So if you want to change it, you have to disable that service. So if you were using the other kind of rack, you would have to disable that. And I've left the instructions for that in there because if you go and try to use a different kind of rack, I want you to, maybe you'll remember, oh, there's this thing I might need to change. Okay, so
on my data plane side, I'm going to go back. I'm just going to find it. I'm going to ping my data plane interface again. And so it pings like it did before. And I'm going to kill my iPerf server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down my data plane interface. So I'm doing sudo ifconfig. My server data interface is the one listed on my worksheet. Make sure you get the right one, because there will be a little bit of sadness if you get the wrong one. Okay? And then I'm going to tell it down. All right, so on my client side, you might have noticed that my pings just stopped. And if we wait here for a little while, we'll start getting a message about the destination host being unreachable. All right? And perhaps that's not terribly surprising. And I'm going to sit here patiently waiting for that to happen. It takes a little bit of time. Right, so here, I have a picture we can talk to. Right, so when we brought down, so we were sending traffic, we were pinging along this data plane interface, and we brought down that interface, and then unsurprisingly, that traffic stopped, right? And so that sort of makes sense, and that's sort of what we just did. Good. And now that we're back, the destination host is unreachable, right? So we were pinging along an interface, we brought down one of the ends, unsurprisingly, the traffic stops. That is no surprise there. Now we're going to do the same thing with the control plane interface, okay? So I'm going to, again, ping, just like I did at the beginning, the control plane interface. And so some traffic goes, and that's great. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to bring down my server interface. And so two things are going to happen. So I'm pinging, you'll notice at the top I'm pinging, and I bring down that interface and my pings stop. And there's a second thing that happened, which is, anybody guess that my SSH on my server hung, right? So what's happening here, right? So we brought down the control plane interface. So we sent some traffic along the control plane. We brought down that interface. Unsurprisingly, that traffic stopped. That's pretty straightforward. But then the thing that you should always be thinking about is I'm also SSH'd in on that control plane interface. And so when I brought down that control interface, I lost my SSH connection, right? So I officially actually broken my setup, right? I'm now in a state I can't recover from, right? Because I brought down both of my interfaces and there's no way to talk to my node, which is not protect. Perhaps unsurprising, but there it is. So,
now that you've seen it, you should sit down and just sort of go through it real quick. That part. So I'm going to
were people doing it as I went, or did they wait for me? People are already staring. So, do you guys want a few minutes to do this on your own? Lost? Actually, why don't you help him? What's your question? Excellent. Right. So what happened here, right? This traffic stopped, and then here, you like, exactly, because you wrote it down, right? So you're done. So we're gonna delete, and we're done, right? If you did this at home, you would start over. Yeah. All right. How are folks doing? Did you guys? That's good. Y'all logged in? Perfect. Thank you so much for helping with the putty thing. How are you guys doing? You doing good? How are you guys doing? Any questions? Yeah. Oh, come back there.
I was trying to get to where it's
Oh, yeah.
Illinois for me,
Yeah.
but it never.
Oh, interesting.
It just sits there. And
How long has it been sitting on this like this? A few minutes? Like a couple or like 20?
I keep trying to.
Ah,
I keep
so-
trying to do it.
Okay, just let it sit for a minute. Call me over if in like 5 minutes is not back. Okay, like 5 should be more than 20. I have some slides, so we can still have a little time. Okay. How are you doing?
I just want to know how should I configure.
How to configure the link? So you don't need to configure the link. You probably configured. Here. Can you hit cancel? Can you click that?
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah. What happens?
And
Oh, perfect. You haven't. You don't need to change
I
it.
mean, I want to do this.
Oh, you want to change? Yeah, you just fill in a new number up there.
So I have to do the resource and
Start again, yeah, unfortunately. Is that it? Okay. All right. So it seems like folks are doing pretty good. For those of you who are done, so the important thing here is one of the nice things about Genie is if you do something like this and you mess up your node, you know what? It's easy, just delete it.
Start again. Okay? And anyways,
you should always clean up, okay? So you don't want to hold on to resources, especially disabled ones. So to clean up, you just click the delete button in FLAC, and you can say delete it used managers. That way, we only used one aggregate manager, and so it'll just talk to the one. And you really want to deallocate all the resources in my slice? Yes, I really do. And it's going to sit here and it's going to think a while, right? So when you're done, you just do that. That's in the instructions. It's on the final page. There's a little picture that shows where to click, right? And so it's important. This is important because there's a finite number of resources. You're sharing this thing. Sort of be polite. When you're done, reuse your resources. And then, so I promised at the beginning that we'd do 3 things: that you'd run your first Genie experiment, that you'd learn some terminology and use it, and that we'd use your 2 tools, and we did. And so that's the end of the first exercise. And how are we doing on time? Oh, perfect. Excellent. So, so that's the end of the first exercise. And I have some slides to talk to, some additional material. If there are folks who are straggling, I'm going to go ahead and I think keep talking. Does anybody need me to wait for a minute? I'm happy to wait for a second. All right, real quick. Okay, so we already talked about, sorry, let me back up a second. So, one of the nice things
about some of the tools in Genie is it makes it really easy to work with a group of people. And so we're going to sort of talk about how that works, okay? So
as you saw, anybody can get an account in Genie, but you can't do any work without being in a project, right? In the project, we said that organizes resources and people, and we sort of just played around with how it organizes resources. And so let's talk a little bit about how you organize the people, right? So you have this project lead who's responsible for a project, and there's these other members, right? And so the idea is that you have a different projects, a different Genie project for different things that you're doing. So let's say we have Professor in his lab coat, and he's doing a research project and he's teaching a class. He would have 2 separate projects, and he would sort of set them up a little differently. For the research project, he would be the project lead, and then he would add the people who worked in his labs as members of that project. In the classroom situation, he would be the project lead, but then he might make a TA be an admin, and then being an admin gives you almost basically all of the power that the lead has, except without sort of the responsibility. You're not gonna, the lead's the one who gets the phone call if something goes wrong. And then the students are added as just regular members, right? And so that means that like the TA can add people to a project, and things, and complete resources if something goes wrong, things like that. And the other thing that you might do for a class is set the expiration. Because the project lead wants to bound his responsibility, and it's a class, he doesn't want, next semester students doing stuff in his project from this semester, so he sets the expiration so that won't happen. All right, so, and so then the question is, how do I get people into a project, right? So there's 2 ways of doing it. One of them is sort of member initiated, and that's just going and clicking. There's that, on the home page, there's a join a projects button, and you find the project you want to join, and you click join, and it sends this email, and that's exactly the process that we did. If you have a large class or a large lab, you can actually make a CSV file of email addresses associated with accounts, and you can bulk add people to a project. And so for GEC, we've done a combination of these things. We went through and found everybody who was registered, looked up, tried to find their account, and we added, I think it was 160 people yesterday. But that wasn't, you notice there's 200 people in the project because there's a few people who didn't, we couldn't find the right account, or they made their account too late, or things like that, and they go through and do the first process. So that's pretty simple. So that gets people into a project, and then once they're in a project, you can add them to your slice, right? So, in the same way that a project can have multiple members, so can a slice. And so a slice will have, you can have multiple slices, obviously. The slice lead is usually the person who created the slice, but the project lead and the admins are added to the slice by default. And what that means is that the head of a lab is responsible for what happens in his project, or the head of or the teacher of a class is responsible for what his students do in it. By default, has the ability to go in and act on the things that are happening in his project. All right. But then, in addition, you can add other people. Like maybe there's a colleague you want to have access to your slice, you can add that as well. Okay. So that means with any tool that sort of any Genie tool, you can do basic operations on your slice. You can add resources. You can check status. You can delete things if something's gone horribly, horribly wrong. And you can renew, which is really nice. And so that's really, really handy. And that's really important if you're sort of responsible, especially if you're responsible for what's happening in your project. But in addition, the thing is, slice membership doesn't always guarantee that you have the ability to log into physical nodes. And there are a couple of tools that do that right now, and we're working on the third. There's sort of unfortunately, if you reserve resources through FLAC, only the person who reserved the resource gets an account and has their SSH keys loaded, right? However, if you use the portal directly, there's an add resources button on the slice page, or if you use a tool that we're using this afternoon called Omni, it will go and it will look up all the members of your slice, and it will create an account for each of those members, and it will put their public SSH key on that account, which means that you can have, say you have a research project, there's 5 people on your team, not all 5 of them have to understand how to reserve resources in Genie. One person has to understand how to reserve resources in Genie, and he can reserve it, and everybody else can get access, right? And then, so that's the first 2 options. There's this third option, which is you can come up with a public-private key pair and sort of pass it out to everybody and have them all load the same public key into their profile page, and so it doesn't matter whoever reserves resources. I don't really recommend the third option. But the first 2 options are really, really nice for a group research project. So that's really nice. And good. And that was my last slide before lunch. And, oh my goodness, I'm 12 minutes early. Did that happen? Okay, that's unprecedented. I'm never early. Okay, so, anybody have any questions?
So after lunch, what we're gonna do is, what we did this morning is a very manual process, right? Like we had 2 nodes and that was already getting annoying, right? Like, so you don't wanna do it this way all the time. And so what we're gonna do this afternoon is we're gonna talk about how to save sort of your setup and how to reserve things again, and also how to automate that process of installing software and starting it, right? So the exercise we're going to do this afternoon is in some sense actually easier because we're going to sort of full advantage of the tools. And so this morning we just wanted you to see what's happening and how it works. And then this afternoon we're going to go in and we're going to do things sort of more efficiently. And then, so that one shouldn't take the full hour and a half. And what we're going to do after that is I have some sort of debugging tips and sort of things, you know, it's like you're going to leave GEC and you're going to want to run your own experiment, which is fantastic. And there's like the next 3 questions you're going to have. We're going to talk about what those questions are and how to address them. And we're going to talk about some common debugging things, 3 or 4 things. And you know what? Oh, no, that's good. Okay, good. So that's what we're going to do this afternoon. Do you really not have any questions? Okay, good.
To affect the link back with that I do see, it's not working that way.
You don't think it's worth that?
So I said, 100 videos.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, 100. So you said 100. Is it off by a factor? You said it's 100 PPS or 100 kilobits?
okay. It's
Yeah, so it's slightly less.
no, but this one is stop. This is higher. This is so some reason I don't understand.
We'll talk about it. Anybody else have a question? All right, so we're slightly early for lunch. So we're 10 minutes early for lunch. Would you guys mind if we go to lunch and then come back 10 minutes early so we can gain the 10 minutes on the back end? Or do we want to just come back at 1:30? Anybody? Somebody express an opinion. First person expresses an opinion wins. Actually, I should double check. It starts at an hour, right?
Yeah, we start at 1:30.
At 1:30?
Yep.
We just want to do 1:30 and we can like chat at lunch and meet lots of people and network. That sounds good. Okay, we'll do that. 1:30. Be back here. We're going to start right on time. So, and don't lose your handouts. I have a couple of spares, but not a lot.